Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Saturday afternoon. It's a little cloudy outside, but it was a beautiful day. A little overcast, not that hot. Today's video, of course, brought to you by the folks at Coke Zero, or maybe we can make that up. And here we go. I made a video earlier, and it didn't work at all. I tried a variety of different devices. Technology is supposed to make your life easier. Mostly, it just improved my ability to use words I shouldn't be using. Trouble. Here we go. Unit 7, Part 1, and we begin. This is a unit that begins for us with Teddy Roosevelt, who's the greatest American president since our buddy Abe Lincoln went home to that great presidential house in the sky in 1865. Now, Roosevelt believed that America was a great power. We might not have the Navy, the Army, the prestige, and the history of a great power, but he thought that we should start acting like one, behaving like one. And that's why we'll see things like us in the Panama Canal. Roosevelt thought that the world was a safer place if the United States was stronger, and we would be stronger if we had a canal that connected our Atlantic possessions and our Pacific possessions. Whew, easy for you to say. Now, this is not something that was easily achieved, and it's also one of those moments where America behaves in a way that down the road historians are going to say, that was a little sketchy. But Roosevelt would tell you this is what nations need to do occasionally. Roosevelt's also going to extend the terms of the Monroe Doctrine with the Roosevelt Corollary, which in essence says to those countries of Latin America, you are part of our team. And if you fail to live up to the standards of our team, we will come and discipline you and take care of your home until you do so. It's very big brotherish. It's the sort of thing that in a couple of decades, we're going to try and erase with some good-natured behavior and also delivering of cookies and things like that. It's just not a great American moment in that sense, but moving along. The progressives. The progressives are the big idea of the rest of our unit. A progressive, generally speaking, believes that the ills of society can be solved. We can solve them through private community activism, like someone like Jane Addams, who opens Hull House in Chicago in order to help immigrant women. Or we can solve them through big national movements, like the movement to get the 18th Amendment passed, banning alcohol, or the 19th Amendment, getting women the right to vote. But the problems can be solved. If we scientifically study them, if we look at them, we can overturn problems. Now, why do we need these kind of things? Because the progressives believed the greatest force in society was the capitalist greed of big business. The Carnegie Rockefeller wealth of the world needed to be counteracted with some sort of force. And the only thing capable of that kind of force was the federal government of the United States. And so we're going to need the government to step in order to make things better for the people who are living in crowded tenements in New York City or people who are getting bad food products. All of those need some progressive help. Some examples, just gliding down the list. Jacob Riis, photojournalist who's going to show us what tenements look like in order to try and improve them. His book's called How the Other Half Lives. Upton Sinclair. Sinclair is a muckraker. He's going to tell you what it's like making meat. And he's not going to spare you any ugly details. He's not going to make it pleasant for you so that you're appalled by it and you do something about it. That's the progressive push. We are going to make things better. On top of that, Alice Paul, willing to get arrested, go on hunger strikes, get force-fed in order to draw attention to the suffragette movement, which eventually pays off with the 19th Amendment later in this unit. Good job, Alice. Okay. Jane Addams, as I mentioned earlier, looks around her neighborhood. She sees a lot of out of work, unemployed, that is, homeless immigrant women, and she does something about it. Hull House is an attempt to try and set back that trend by getting women skills, getting them back on their feet, and finding them a way to live as single mothers who can be the breadwinners. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire is a tragedy in New York City where had progressive reforms taken place, we wouldn't have near as many deaths from fire. Unfortunately, a little bit too late for the people who died at the Triangle Factory that day. Page 1, yada here. Number 2, we go to Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy believes in this thing called a square deal. The square deal is this notion that the federal government should give you a good stance. We're not going to give you anything free, right? This is not yet the world of, say, an Obamacare or Bernie Sanders and the hope for universal health care. This is an attempt to say you should start on an even footing. Under Teddy Roosevelt, we have a big push for the federal government to preserve the national wildlife areas in order to make conservation happen. Teddy Roosevelt also pushes through the Pure Food and Drug Act in order to create federal departments and a bureaucracy that will monitor the way we make our nation's food, because holy moly, it's a mess. He's also most famous, though, for his trust busting. Roosevelt thought that the federal government should do something about businesses that were too powerful. If a business used its power and its size, its share of the market, that is to say, in order to drive others out of the market, then that was not good, right? If this is the only brand of glue stick you can buy, then we should make sure that they responsibly price their product so that glue sticks, which you and I can all agree are essential things, so that glue sticks are not too expensive. If they start to abuse that power, Teddy Roosevelt's going to call the leader of the glue stick company, let's call him Glue Stick, into the White House. He's going to sit down with him and he is going to individually tell him, "You're done." Now, what power does Roosevelt have to do that? The Sherman Antitrust Act, which says that the government may, if it is necessary, break up those companies that are, here's the quote, "in restraint of trade." Okay, businesses that are trying to make it difficult for people to buy glue sticks or for other people to get into the glue stick market. Teddy Roosevelt's the first of the American presidents to do that. He's also the first to do something for labor unions. Up until now, we haven't seen much of a push by American presidents to try and help with labor. Remember last unit, how we broke up strikes? We sent in the troops and we cracked some workers' skulls. None of that anymore. Roosevelt's going to bring in the owners and the workers and threaten to take over the mines. Let's be fair about that. He's not really siding with either side, but he's saying, both of you have a right to be here and talk, and that's a new approach. Woodrow Wilson comes another president after Teddy Roosevelt. Keep in mind, William Howard Taft's in the middle, so no real love for William Howard Taft here, but you keep being you, William Howard Taft. Woodrow Wilson is a Democrat, unlike Roosevelt, who was a Republican, but Wilson believes in this broad progressive agenda, and he's doing some of it. We get the Federal Reserve System trying to stabilize the nation's money supply and also stabilize the economy. We get the Federal Trade Commission and the Clayton Antitrust Act, and Woodrow Wilson is just getting warmed up. And then the world goes to war in 1914. Unfortunately, Wilson's got to take that agenda and put it up on the shelf and say, drat. Now I've got to work on some other things. So there would probably be a bigger square here if it were not for the World's War. But unfortunately for Wilson, he didn't make the agenda. Okay? Why don't we get involved with the war, right? Teddy Roosevelt would say to you, we need to get in here. If there's going to be a war, this is what manly nations do. Roosevelt, unfortunately, is not in charge here, though. This is Woodrow Wilson, and Wilson thinks we should be neutral. Why? Because we're better than that. Exceptionalism holds that the United States has a unique track, and that unique track is not going to fall into the same ploy or the same plan that might, for instance, drag other nations into petty disputes. Number two, we have a lot of immigrants. No matter who you look at in America, their immigrant background is going to make drafting them into an army hard, right? World War I is a battle between Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and some other nations too, no disrespect there, but all of those nations have significant immigrant bases in the United States. It's going to be really hard to pick a side, draft an army, send someone to go shoot their cousin. That is difficult stuff, so we should stay out of it. Likewise, we should also ship to both sides. Now, we're going to ship a whole lot more to Britain and France than we do to Austria-Hungary and Germany, but that's just the way that worked out. And there are going to be people when we get to our next unit who are going to say, I think our real motivation here was money. That really the reason the United States did what it did was to try and get its money back that it had loaned out to the British and the French. More on that later. The Lusitania is this disaster where the Germans sink a British passenger liner. There's a lot of hue and cry to go to war, and Wilson says, you cool your jets. We're not going to war right now. The people who were on that boat knew that they shouldn't have been sailing on that boat. And the Germans promised not to sink any more boats until they sunk some more boats. Top of page 3. The Germans send out a letter to the Mexican government saying, hey, in a little while, we're going to have to start sinking American boats or we're going to lose this war, right? This is a war of attrition or calories, and America is doing too much to help Britain and France. So what about a little bit of a war against the United States? And when America finds out about that, well, then, unfortunately, we're into the war. It's important that we remember the phrase here, though. Wilson says we're getting in here to make the world safe for democracy, not to seize land, take territory, be tawdry Europeans. We're here for the right reasons. While the war is going on, I've talked about the fact that women are going to gain the right to vote, mostly due to their work in conservation of food and also in working in a lot of roles that men had traditionally filled. We're going to see African Americans come up out of the South and take jobs in northern factories, the Great Migration, leading to the cultural outbreak that is the Harlem Renaissance and a new age for African Americans. I'm reading some DBQs. A lot of people reference the Great Migration and the Harlem Renaissance. You go, DBQ writers. Good job. Okay, prohibition. The 18th Amendment banned alcohol. We thought it was patriotic. At the time we thought Germans were the drinkers. We also thought it would be a good way to save supplies. Instead of making beer, we should make bread. And also it's really a long American effort. We've been trying to push this since the 18 teens. This notion that alcohol is the single greatest ill, and if we solve it, we're home. That's behind that. The Espionage Act is an attempt to try and limit criticism of the government, especially any criticism that might limit the government's ability to fight the war. Charles Schenck is your average socialist passing out pamphlets trying to encourage people not to fight in the war, and he gets thrown in the clink for it. And Schenck says, I've got First Amendment rights, and the Supreme Court says, yes, you do, Mr. Schenck, but context matters. And in the case of World War I, you can't say whatever it is you want to say. So unfortunately, you're going to have to hang out in jail for now. And next time, when there's a war on, don't hand out your pamphlets. All right. Wilson's 14 points are much more broad, open-minded. Wilson wants the freedom of the seas. He wants a world where there's not going to be a lot of arms, so he wants disarmament. He also wants this great League of Nations where there's arbitration. Now, he does get the League of Nations, but what he doesn't get is a complete let's forget about it and move on. Britain and France have to deal with their own populations, and those people are angry. They have had 4 years of blood and suffering and a lot of money spent, and they're going to want reparations from Germany and land from Germany. So the Treaty of Versailles is kind of the child of two very odd parents, one forgiving, Woodrow Wilson's International League of Nations approach, and the other one, the one that's much more punitive, the ideas of the French and the British and their hope for Germany paying up. At the bottom, we're going to refuse to pass the Treaty of Versailles, or ratify, I should say, and join the League of Nations. That's mostly because the Senate feels that in doing so, we would surrender the American ability to wage war. Last page. All right. This is an entire shift holiday. What are we doing now? Well, the world for us changes. America is at the end of a phase. At the end of World War I, we're going to take stock of things and decide, I don't like where I am. And the nation is going to pull back from a lot of its international approach and a lot of its liberal policies. And we're going to see a whole slate of conservative run. That's what this is, the conservative backlash against the liberal progressivism. So for instance, the Palmer raids. We're rounding up radicals and socialists because we think there's going to be a socialist revolution in America. There are all sorts of people who are going to get in trouble. Now, I skipped over briefly the race riots and the strikes. That's mostly due to the slowdown in the economy. But all of those strikes have got conservatives worried that that's how the Russian Revolution started, and we don't want that. Okay. On top of that, we're going to limit immigration, especially immigration of new immigrants, people who came from Southern and Eastern Europe. The Klan's going to show up again, this time with far more national support, far broader of a scope of hate, and also willing to be much more public about things. Right? Klan membership in the country was about 5%, some areas as high as 10%. Marcus Garvey's going to respond to that by saying, my fellow African Americans, we should get out of here. We should go to Africa and we should start a soul state there. This is not the first time and also not the last time we'll see the idea of Afrocentrism or black nationalism, black separatism. And Garvey's ideas are strongly influenced by the fact that the American Klan is so strong and so well supported. He feels as though the only safe place is somewhere else. The Scopes trial is the trial of a well-to-do, nice biology teacher who teaches evolution and gets in trouble for it. And he knows he's going to get in trouble for it. And then when it's done, the nation has this huge trial over whether or not he should have done it. And really, it's America taking stock of itself, saying, who are we? Are we evolution, modernity, science, the new America, or are we the old America? Biblical, the creationist account of how things should have gone. It's an interesting moment for us. 1920s escapism. Go have some fun. America's looking at the world essentially blowing up, and this is the response you'll see to World War I as well. America thinking, man, we may as well have some fun. Let's buy a radio. Let's go to a professional sporting event. Let's go to the movies. Let's buy a car. That's real American freedom. And you're also going to see freedom for a lot of women who are going to translate their political freedom into a cultural freedom. You're going to see flapper girls, women smoking in public, being a little more outgoing in many ways. It's a very different age than the 1920s. I hope you have a good night, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope this video works.